Barron Trump gives an elderly woman a new home. Her reaction will bring you to tears. The biting December wind howled through Willow Creek, a modest town nestled in rolling hills blanketed with snow. Streetlights cast golden halos over icy sidewalks as residents hurried indoors to escape the cold. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and wood smoke from chimneys that dotted the landscape. It was the kind of evening where the world seemed to pause, holding its breath against the frosty silence. Amid this quiet winter scene, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway of a weathered apartment complex on the outskirts of town. The engine purred softly before falling silent, and out stepped Barron Trump, his tall frame wrapped in a tailored wool coat that shielded him from the chill. His presence here was unexpected. A young man often seen in the shadow of global headlines, now standing alone on a frost-bitten evening, driven by something deeper than curiosity or obligation. Inside one of the dimly lit units lived Margaret Hensley, an 82-year-old widow whose life had unraveled after losing her cherished family home to foreclosure. Once filled with laughter and warmth, her old house now belonged to strangers, leaving Margaret stranded in a cramped rental that barely shielded her from the elements. The walls were thin, the radiator sputtered weakly, and cracks in the window panes let drafts seep through, but photos of smiling grandchildren still adorned the walls, a reminder of brighter days. Margaret sat in her worn armchair, wrapped in a faded shawl, staring out at the snow-covered street below. Her hands rested gently on her lap, fingers tracing the edges of a tattered photo album. Each page held memories of holidays past, birthdays celebrated around a crowded table, summer barbecues in the backyard, and Christmas mornings when the house buzzed with excitement. Those moments felt distant now, like echoes of another life. When there was a knock at the door, Margaret hesitated before rising to answer it. She wasn't accustomed to visitors, let alone someone like him. "Mr. Trump?" she asked, clutching the shawl tightly around her shoulders. Her voice trembled slightly, equal parts surprise and confusion. "What brings you here?" Barron stood on her doorstep, his breath visible in the chilly air. He offered a warm smile, his demeanor calm and genuine. "Mrs. Hensley," he replied, his tone soft but steady, "I heard about your situation and wanted to meet you personally." Margaret flushed with embarrassment, glancing back at the sparse furnishings behind her. A single chair, a sagging mattress piled high with blankets, and little else. "It's not much," she murmured apologetically, stepping aside to let him in. "It doesn't matter," Barron said firmly, brushing off her concern as he stepped inside. "What matters is how you're doing." The room was small but tidy, every surface carefully arranged to make the most of the limited space. A stack of books sat neatly on a side table, their spines worn from years of use. A threadbare rug covered the floor, and a single lamp cast a soft glow over the room. Despite the obvious signs of hardship, there was a sense of dignity in the way Margaret carried herself, a quiet resilience that spoke volumes about the life she had lived. As they sat together, Margaret opened up about her life, the joy of raising 3 children in the home she lost, the heartbreak of financial struggles, and the loneliness that came with starting over at her age. "That house wasn't just a building," Margaret said, tears welling in her eyes. "It held everything I loved. Every corner had a memory. My kids' first steps, birthday parties, holiday dinners. Now..." Her voice trailed off, heavy with emotion. Barron listened intently, his expression thoughtful. He could see the weight of her loss etched into every corner of the room, and in the way she carried herself. Though he had grown up surrounded by luxury, he understood the importance of having a place to call home, a sanctuary from the chaos of the world. Before leaving, Barron made a silent promise to himself. This wasn't just a visit. It was the beginning of something more. But what happens next will leave you speechless. If this unexpected act of kindness caught your attention, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories. What do you think Barron has planned for Margaret? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your predictions. After leaving Margaret's apartment, Barron's mind raced with possibilities. The image of her drafty windows, the flickering light bulb, and the sadness in her eyes lingered in his thoughts. Though he had grown up surrounded by luxury, he understood the importance of having a place to call home, a sanctuary from the chaos of the world. For Margaret, losing her house wasn't just about losing shelter, it was about losing a part of herself, a repository of memories that defined her life. Determined to help, Barron called a trusted real estate agent and asked to see available properties nearby. He described exactly what he was looking for. Something cozy yet modern, affordable but dignified, and most importantly, a place where Margaret could feel safe and comfortable again. Within hours, they found a charming cottage on the outskirts of Willow Creek. It was small but inviting, with freshly painted walls, warm wooden floors, and a small garden blooming defiantly against the winter frost. A crackling fireplace added coziness, while a blooming apple tree stood proudly in the backyard, its branches dusted with snow. "This is perfect," Barron murmured, envisioning Margaret sitting by the fireplace or tending to the plants outside. This could be her fresh start. That same afternoon, Barron returned to Margaret's apartment with a plan. He knocked gently on her door, and when she opened it, her expression shifted from surprise to curiosity. "Mrs. Hensley," he said warmly, "would you like to take a drive with me? There's something I'd like to show you." Confused but intrigued, Margaret agreed. She wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and followed him to his car. As they drove through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, she couldn't help but wonder where they were going. When they arrived at the cottage, Barron parked the car and stepped out, gesturing for her to follow him. "Take a look," he said simply, opening the door and stepping aside to let her enter first. Margaret hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Her eyes widened as she took in the space. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating the inviting interior. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood, and the warmth of the fireplace made the room feel alive. In the kitchen, gleaming countertops and modern appliances contrasted with the rustic charm of exposed beams. Through the back door, she could see the garden, where a few hardy flowers still bloomed despite the cold. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Then came the moment that would change her life forever. "Mrs. Hensley," Barron said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "this house is yours, if you'll have it." Margaret froze, gripping the doorframe as if afraid to collapse. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't speak. "How?" she finally managed to choke out. "How can I possibly afford this?" "You don't have to," Barron replied gently, his tone unwavering. "Consider it a gift. I just want to ensure you have a safe, comfortable place to live." Overwhelmed, Margaret threw her arms around him, sobbing openly. "I don't know what to say," she choked out between tears. "This changes everything." Barron hugged her back, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. For him, this wasn't about publicity or recognition. It was about making a tangible difference in someone's life. As they walked through the house together, Margaret began to imagine the possibilities. She pointed to the garden, her eyes lighting up. "I could plant roses here," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "And maybe some lavender. My grandchildren always loved running through the flowers when they were little." Barron smiled, watching as her demeanor shifted from disbelief to hope. "This is your home now," he said firmly. "Make it yours." But even as Margaret began to embrace the idea of a new beginning, questions lingered in the back of her mind. Why had Barron chosen her? What did this mean for her future? And how could she ever repay such an extraordinary gift? For Barron, the gesture was simple. It was about seeing someone in need and acting on it. But for Margaret, it was so much more. The cottage represented not just shelter, but a second chance, a reminder that even in her darkest moments, there were still people who cared. As they prepared to leave, Barron handed her a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Margaret, everyone deserves a place to call home. This is just the beginning of brighter days ahead. With gratitude, Barron." Tears welled in her eyes as she read the words, realizing that this wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was a lifeline. If Margaret's reaction moved you, share this video with someone who believes in the power of kindness. Have you ever received an unexpected gift that changed your perspective? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. Together, let's celebrate moments of compassion and connection. Word of Barron's gesture spread quickly through Willow Creek. Neighbors who had known Margaret for years stopped by the cottage to congratulate her, bringing casseroles, fresh-baked pies, and offers to help unpack. The local newspaper caught wind of the story, eager to highlight the humanity behind the headline. A journalist named Sarah Thompson arrived at Margaret's door one afternoon, notebook in hand and camera slung over her shoulder. "Mrs. Hensley," Sarah began warmly, "can you tell me how this all happened? What was your reaction when Mr. Trump gave you this house?" Margaret hesitated for a moment, glancing around her new home. The cottage already felt like hers. The scent of lavender from the garden wafting through the open windows, the soft glow of sunlight on freshly painted walls. She smiled faintly, remembering the overwhelming emotions of that day. "It was surreal," Margaret said softly, her voice tinged with gratitude. "I never imagined something like this could happen to me. But more than anything, it reminded me that there's still kindness in the world." Sarah nodded, scribbling notes as Margaret spoke. Her article, titled "A Second Chance: How One Gesture Changed a Life," appeared in the next edition of the paper. It featured photos of Margaret standing proudly in front of her new home, her eyes shining with hope. But not everyone reacted positively. Some critics accused Barron of using the situation for publicity, questioning his motives and suggesting the act was performative rather than genuine. Online forums buzzed with debates, some praising his generosity, while others dismissed it as a drop in the ocean compared to larger societal issues. Why didn't he just donate to affordable housing programs instead of giving one person a house? Read one comment on social media. "He's just trying to clean up his family's image," another added skeptically. Margaret, however, remained unfazed by the noise. For her, the cottage represented more than shelter. It symbolized hope and the belief that kindness still existed in the world. One evening, as she unpacked boxes in her new home, there was a knock at the door. Standing outside was a young woman named Clara, holding a basket of fresh-baked cookies. "I heard about what happened," Clara said shyly. "My grandma lives down the street, and she told me your story. I just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." Margaret smiled warmly, inviting Clara inside. As they sat together in the cozy living room, Clara shared her own struggles, working multiple jobs to support her family while pursuing a nursing degree. Inspired by Barron's gesture, she had begun volunteering at a local senior center, hoping to make a difference in her own way. "You remind me of myself at your age," Margaret said kindly. "Never underestimate the impact of small acts of kindness. They ripple outward in ways you might never expect." Clara nodded thoughtfully, absorbing Margaret's words. Meanwhile, Barron faced mounting pressure from both supporters and detractors. While many praised his actions, others demanded he address broader systemic issues like affordable housing and elder care. Reporters hounded him for interviews, eager to dissect his intentions and amplify the controversy. Though tempted to retreat from the spotlight, Barron realized he had an opportunity to amplify Margaret's story further. He posted a heartfelt message online. "Kindness starts with individuals, not systems. Yes, we need policy changes and collective action, but we also need people willing to extend a hand today. Margaret reminded me of the dignity everyone deserves. If my gesture inspires even one person to help another, it's worth it." His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations about empathy, privilege, and the power of individual action. For Margaret, the attention brought both joy and challenges. Strangers began stopping by unannounced, curious to see the house or share their own stories. Some offered help, others simply wanted to bask in the glow of her good fortune. While grateful for the outpouring of support, Margaret found herself longing for quiet moments to adjust to her new life. One crisp morning, as she watered the flowers in her garden, a neighbor approached her, a retired teacher named Helen. "I've lived here for 30 years, Helen said with a warm smile. It's inspiring to see someone like you get a second chance. If you ever need anything, groceries, errands, company, don't hesitate to ask. Margaret thanked her, feeling a renewed sense of belonging. Slowly but surely, she began to weave herself into the fabric of the community, hosting small gatherings and sharing stories of resilience with anyone who would listen. And yet, amidst the warmth and camaraderie, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that her journey wasn't over. The cottage was more than a gift. It was a responsibility, a reminder to pay forward the kindness she had received. As winter gave way to spring, the garden she had planted began to bloom, filling the air with the sweet scent of roses and lavender. Watching the flowers grow, Margaret realized that her life, too, was blossoming in ways she hadn't imagined. But what she didn't know was that the ripple effects of Barron's gesture were only beginning to unfold. If this story inspires you to take action in your own community, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder of the difference one person can make. What's one small act of kindness you can do today? Share your ideas in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story motivates you. In the weeks that followed, Margaret settled into her new home, rediscovering joys she thought were lost forever. She planted flowers in the garden, baked cookies for neighbors, and wrote letters to her grandchildren, sharing stories of her renewed spirit. The cottage became more than just a house. It was a sanctuary, a place where memories could be created anew. One crisp morning, Barron visited unexpectedly, carrying a framed photo of Margaret standing proudly in front of her cottage. He had commissioned a local photographer to capture the moment when she first stepped into her new home, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. "For you," he said, handing her the framed photo, "to remind you of how far you've come and how much strength you've shown." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she accepted the gift. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for the house, but for reminding me that I'm not invisible." Barron smiled humbly, shaking his head. "No, thank you. You've taught me that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the biggest impact." As they stood together in the sunlight, watching birds flit between trees, Margaret realized she wasn't just receiving a gift, she was part of something greater. Her story had inspired others in Willow Creek to pay it forward. Clara, the young woman who had brought cookies on her first day in the neighborhood, continued volunteering at the senior center. Inspired by Margaret's resilience, she organized events that brought generations together: game nights, gardening workshops, and storytelling sessions where elders shared wisdom with younger residents. Helen, the retired teacher, formed a community group to assist elderly residents with chores and errands. What began as a small initiative grew into a network of neighbors supporting one another, proving that kindness could ripple outward in unexpected ways. Even skeptics softened their stance, acknowledging that change often begins with individual acts of compassion. One critic who had initially dismissed Barron's gesture as performative later posted an apology online. "I underestimated the power of a single act of kindness." Watching how this story has united a community proves that empathy can spark real change. For Barron, the experience reinforced his belief in the power of empathy. Though he returned to his private life, he carried Margaret's lessons with him, a reminder that true leadership lies in lifting others up. On Christmas Eve, Margaret hosted a small gathering at her cottage, filling the space with laughter and warmth. Neighbors brought dishes to share, and children played in the garden, while adults exchanged stories around the fireplace. As snow fell gently outside, Margaret raised a toast to kindness, resilience, and the connections that bind us all. "To second chances," she said, her voice steady and warm, "and to the people who remind us that we're never truly alone." The room erupted in applause, and Barron, seated quietly in a corner, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. For him, this wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about seeing the tangible impact of a single gesture. Later that evening, as guests departed and the house grew quiet, Margaret sat by the fire, gazing at the framed photo Barron had given her. She traced its edges with her fingers, feeling a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the house, but for the way it had reconnected her to the world. Her story had become a beacon of hope, not just for her, but for everyone fortunate enough to witness it. And so, what began as a simple act of generosity became a testament to the enduring power of kindness, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there are still people willing to extend a hand. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe to our channel for more uplifting tales of courage and compassion. What's one lesson you'll carry with you from Margaret and Barron's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how their story inspires you to make a difference. Together, let's keep spreading stories that prove no act of kindness is too small to spark change.